Hi there, my name's Josh Muller. I am the president of Melbourne Bisexual Network. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm also a psychologist working in Melbourne, and I'm here with Megan to talk all about Biplus issues once again. Good to see you, Megan.
Hi, I'm Meg. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I'm also a member of MBN, which is something that I really love being a part of.
So today we thought we would talk a bit about bodies and attraction and physical or sexual and romantic attraction, and I guess kind of like some of these interactions and really kind of like what makes Biplus people special, what can make Biplus people special. And I was really reflecting, Megan, on some of the kind of interesting things that can come up through being bisexual in particular, and like having sexual attraction to people of different genders, which can also mean being sexual with people with different types of bodies, different types of body parts.
Yeah, I think it's a really important and interesting part of bisexuality that maybe doesn't get discussed all that much. I think often we're a bit afraid to talk about sex because of our fear of being over-sexualized. And I know in a lot of the bi spaces I really enjoy being in, they're very much not about sex. And much more about friendship and support and community. But I think like the sex aspect obviously is an important part for a lot of us, and I think it's one of the best things about dating bi plus folk is that we have often a lot more spacious ideas around sex and gender and bodies. And yeah, I don't know, I think that's a really wonderful aspect of our identities is that often, yeah, we do have a lot more room for variance and variation, and we don't have such strict ideas about what sex is, what it should look like, what it should feel like. And that kind of gives everybody in these relationships maybe a bit more room to express themselves and to explore themselves and to decide who they are and how they want to present, how they want to identify. I think for me, there's a great freedom in dating bi plus folk. And I feel that for myself when I'm with other people, that I feel like there's greater freedom for them to be themselves with me because of my bisexuality.
Something I guess that around that has kind of brought to my mind is thinking about sexual scripts. We learn these sexual scripts or particular archetypes or particular like rules of engagement with sex from the cultures that we grow up in, the education that we get, who our friends are, and these sorts of things. And so, like with many things, we find out the most interesting bits when things get challenged or at the borders. And so I guess when I hear monosexual folk talk about the norms around the type of sex that they tend to have, be it like hetero folks who, depending on their kind of gendered background, are talking about like, I have only experienced sex with men, or I have only experienced sex with women as a man, and that kind of becomes loaded with particular histories, particular understandings, particular ways of engagement that sometimes sound a bit strange to me as a bi person, because I'm like, why would you think that, or why would you, yeah, limit yourself in this particular way in terms of the sex that you're having when there's like this whole sea or this whole area of experience that you could be exploring, but perhaps not, because there are these artificial rules around what does a man do in sex with a woman if both of them are straight, and the kind of like rules or shoulds or expectations that I think really get in the way, that maybe with bi plus folk are not absolutely less often, but maybe challenged in some different ways, I suppose.
I think it ties into a lot around like cisgenderism as well, because often those ideas of what a man and woman are very tied up with our very strict binary ideas about gender too. So again, like I think that trans folks can really suffer in that because people have an expectation of how your gender is connected to your body, that isn't true and isn't based in most people's realities. But again, I think that can be quite damaging for ideas of what sex should look like. What does it look like when your body doesn't fit those binary ideas of what you've been told it should. And again, I think intersex people suffer in these ways too, these ideas of what body parts we're supposed to have and how they're supposed to tessellate together, and this particular act that is supposed to go down in a very specific way. Kind of stories are often told about sex are much more about tessellations as opposed to pleasure or just explorations of bodies. They're much more focused around like acts, I think. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about queer sex is it kind of steps out of that, it's not a penis and a vulva in a very specific way. There are so many more beautiful, nuanced ways that sex can be and all the different things that it is. And that's not to say that cis folks are only having very specific kinds of sex. Not
right.
Who would know? Because who does know what kind of sex everybody's having? But there are also reports around just things like, pleasure and who's experiencing more pleasure, who's experiencing less, and often, the folks who are experiencing more pleasure are queer or are not necessarily cis women having sex with cis men. And I think it's quite interesting when we look at sex from those perspectives as opposed to just what is the act that you're performing, but more around how are you engaging with it, what pleasure are you getting from it, how do you feel in yourself whilst you're doing it, how does it make you feel about yourself, all of these things. There's so many aspects to sex which aren't what it is exactly that you're doing, that I think that queerness really brings a bit of a sharper focus to some of those other aspects and less, what am I doing right this moment? Yeah, so very different focus on what it is.
The experience of bisexuality challenges gender norms because being a bi person changes the world from, like, if changes it from the hetero norm where people of different genders are like possible romantic partners, but there's this strange thing of they can't be friends, or it's weird to be friends of people of different genders, and vice versa, of like people of the same gender can only be friends and there's never any sexual energy or like sexual play. But being Biplus kind of strips that binary, strips that distinction. And I think certainly with Biplus people who I know, there's much more intimacy in friendships and maybe like more physical comfort in being somewhat physically intimate with friends, maybe like kissing at parties or giving each other massages, or maybe like friends with benefits type situations. Maybe the other way as well, more interested in treating their partner or sexual partner more like a friend. And I think that's a cool way of approaching things. I also don't want to paint a picture of like all bi people are highly evolved, like holier than thou, because we're not a monolith and everyone's different. Something that you mentioned before around bodies and perhaps like being trans or non-binary and having a body, or let's like specifically talking about genitals or the types of sex that you can have with the genitals or the body that you have, which parts gain pleasure. If you know that your partner is bisexual and attracted to people of all different sorts of bodies, then if you physically transition where your body is no longer the same as it was when you started that partnership, there's maybe more chance of being able to continue that partnership in a kind of physical or sexual way than if your body is somehow strongly changed. That bodily change or that physical transition is maybe slightly less of a challenge to your partner's sexuality if your partner is Biplus and attracted to people of all genders and bodies, or pansexual.
It's a really important thing to mention, is that greater flexibility in who you are attracted to and can be sexually and romantically interested in, and then that room there is for your partners to be themselves in different ways. Because you're, like you say, you're more likely to be attracted to someone if they change. And even if it's not a physical transition, if it's more of a presentation, or, say if I choose to dress very, very masculine and present in a much more masculine way, even though I'm still usually perceived as a woman on a day-to-day basis in my life, but that me presenting masculine informs how other people see my male partner. And, we've definitely get read as a gay couple sometimes, because I present as a woman in lots of ways from different angles. I have short hair and I'm relatively angular in my body, so that is often what people perceive when they see me without seeing my face. And that really informs how people see him. And I think were he a different kind of person, that could have really threatened his ideas about his gender and his sexuality. And I'm very fortunate that it hasn't. I think he's very, very expansive in his ideas about that, and it doesn't worry him. But I know of many other folks who present in different ways on different days that it really does challenge their partners if they're not sort of open to that being perceived as being queer or bisexual. And I think how our partners choose to present and are perceived really does inform how we are seen too. And I think sometimes we don't think about the nuance of that. And again, that's also really valid, that can feel very threatening to people. And that's a wonderful thing about being Biplus, that I'm less likely to be bothered by that. But it also doesn't mean that I won't be as well. And so it's also not trying to praise bi folks as being, we're perfect and glorious and always accepting. Like, of course we're not, and we still have our restrictions about what we find attractive. We can still be primarily attracted to specific types of bodies, specific types of genitals, and there's also zero shame in that. It's just, I do love the possibilities that the people that we love are allowed to be in flux and allowed to change and allowed to present differently, allowed to change their bodies, and that we can still love them and potentially still be very attracted to them. I think there's a lot of beauty in that, and a lot to celebrate, because it allows people to more fully be themselves. And I think that always has to be a good thing, and is something that we should definitely celebrate about our communities.
Finding different aesthetics beautiful, and different gendered expressions beautiful or sexy or attractive, that you might be finding masculine traits in women attractive, or feminine traits in women attractive, or masculine traits in men attractive, feminine traits in men, or like mixed kind of expressions, or really neutral expressions, that this kind of flexibility that you're talking about, once you start opening up away from the scripts that society gives us, which, to be clear, the heteronorm scripts say, if you are a man, you should be masculine and you should be attracted to feminine women. And you only have to look at like who tends to be on underwear billboards or on advertising, or what do Hollywood stars tend to look like. They all tend to look like the sort of homogeneous norm of what we're told we should be like, what we are told we should be attracted to. I was listening to a podcast recently talking about people saying, well, I'm not racist, but I have a preference for these particular races. And holy wow, like that is absolutely informed by culture. And if you're not looking inwards to examine why that is, we could ask the same with sexual preference or romantic preference as well, digging a bit deeper into why. And I think many Biplus people, especially when they're first coming out, maybe really struggle around expressing and being curious around and pursuing their attractions to whatever the gender is that they haven't had practice in, like whatever the one that is new. So if they kind of initially were like, I'm definitely gay, and had a bunch of experiences, and then have later on, perhaps in their later 20s or 30s or 40s, thought, actually, no, I think I'm bi, exploring that different gendered attraction might be really challenging because they've developed all of these norms around same gender attraction. They know what they like, they've practiced that. They know maybe what porn they like or what models they like or how to, I don't know, how to flirt, these sorts of things.
And they know how they'll be perceived doing that because they have experiences of that. I know when I first dated people similar in gender to me and dated women specifically, like, yeah, it was really challenging because the world perceives you really differently. It treats you really differently when you're in those situations, and it is a whirlwind of emotions, and not only the navigating internally within those things. How do I do these things? How do I behave? How does it go? But also the world's reaction to those things and how differently you're treated, the kind of comments you get, the interactions you will have as a result of who you're with. So there's a lot of layers to that change, and yeah, I think it is a very challenging and terrifying thing to be doing as an, particularly if you come out as an adult and you're doing it as an adult who has been through all of the awkwardness of being a teenager and first kisses and first forays into sex, and then you're having to navigate that almost from the beginning with different genders.
Yeah.
It's kind of it is a very overwhelming and quite stressful thing, I think, for a lot of people, and it could be wonderful and glorious and exciting, and also deeply shrouded in shame and just like fear, and again like a beginning again. It's like learning a new language maybe, and being like, well, how do I interact with this body part, and what do I do with this? And particularly I think for, again, my experience as an AFAB person and dating other AFAB people, there's a lot of fear in not over-sexualizing people, because we also know what that can feel like to be over-sexualized. So sometimes I think we have a fear of being too sexual or too forward, and then there can also be not a lot happening for a lot of folks. And I hear this a lot there's a lot of lesbian and bi memes about this, aren't there? This thing that everybody likes one another but no one's doing anything about it. And because again, that script of what you're supposed to do as a woman is be more receptive and less kind of domineering about stuff. And it's again unlearning those scripts and seeing who you want to be and who you are in these different environments is complex. It takes work and a lot of kind of digging to think why you do things or why you don't do things. But I think once you start to dig around, you start to realize there is a lot more space to express yourself in different ways and to explore different parts of yourself, and that's something that definitely can inform a much kind of healthier and happier attitude to sex in general, irrelevant of who it's with or what their body is or any of those facets.
Something that I really wanted to bring up and have a bit of a talk about was Ace and Arrow experience. So it was recently Ace Week. I went to a wonderful panel that was put on with a whole bunch of different lived experience, a bit of education, a bit of discussion, but talking about asexual and also aromantic and the kind of spectrum of asexual or aromantic experiences, so including grey sexual or demi-romantic, demisexual, that lots of folks might be biromantic and asexual, or maybe bisexual and aromantic. And I think it's really important for us, as a Biplus community, to be including folks of different kind of like more or less sexual attraction, full stop, or romantic attraction, full stop, including those folks in our discussions and in our thoughts about what do Biplus issues refer to? Who do they refer to? Because, of course, any biromantic or bisexual person is like, I want them to be welcome. But if we talk way too much about sex and sexual practice, that might feel pretty exclusionary to asexual folks. Same the other way, maybe like talking way too much about romantic attraction and biromantic attraction might kind of exclude aromantic people to a degree as well. Have you had many conversations with people who are either ace or aro and also fit into the Biplus kind of sphere?
To answer that question, not hugely. No, I think it's something I've been learning a lot more about the last sort of year or so, because I think, like bifolk, afolk, bisfolk have not been very well considered or well included in kind of the queer spectrum. And I think it's really interesting to talk about the nuances between, yes, romantic attraction and sexual attraction. And yeah, and really, really important that we're including people who identify in these different ways and making them feel that they are a part of our community, because they definitely are. And like you say, this really important balance between not being afraid to talk about sexuality and sex, because I think I felt that at times, like I don't want to talk about sex because I'm so tired of that being what people think about when they hear bisexuality. And equally, I don't want to be shamed from addressing those things either. I think it's really important to be able to talk about sex, because for me it is an important part of my sexuality. And I also have been finding it so wonderful to learn about the people for whom it's not, and learning about all these variations about it, and that, you know, that sex and sex drive and all those things are always things that are in flux as well, to learn about the different ways of talking about what that can be and how different people experience that. Like learning about terms like gender sexuality has been really interesting to me, and the kinds of being attracted to people much more based on connection, and that's been really wonderful, learning the kind of the words and the language to describe that and to discuss it, because I think that we all experience like sexual attraction very differently. And I have friends who are much more focused on kind of physicality and can really just enjoy sex with people they don't know, and friends who are much more focused on really having deep connections and friendships and building sexual attraction from those things. And I think it's wonderful just having these different ways to understand this, because again, I didn't grow up with this language or with these ways of thinking. I think much more a narrow idea of kind of being a virgin or a whore kind of thing. As an AFAB person, you're very much the pure and the kind of the good, or the slutty or the bad, which was what I was told. But equally, you should be sexual in the right ways and very sexy to like keep your husband, and the kind of stuff I used to see in like Cosmo magazine and be like, but what? How can I be this and also this? And just having this nuance of the space between, which is where most of us exist, isn't it? And praise for being totally pure, and praise for being enormously slutty. Praise for both those things. I think that they're glorious in very different ways for people, but that most of us exist somewhere in between. And yeah, having language around this, I think, really does empower us to think about our interactions and to reflect on our own experiences. And I think learning more about this whole A spectrum is enormously valuable for all of us. And I'm really, really grateful and glad that it's gaining more traction, and there are things like Ace Week going on, because it's really wonderful to learn about it. And I think it hugely empowers Biplus community to be inclusive and to consider all the different folks who are a part of it.
This last 10 to 15 years particularly has had so many more conversations around trans or non-binary or gender expansive experience that has been so useful, even for cisgender folk, to be really thinking about, well, what is gender? And having more interesting or useful language around gender identity versus gender expression, versus maybe sex assigned at birth, or what are your different sex characteristics. I think ace and aro folk are bringing in a conversation around varying sexual attraction or romantic attraction is really useful. Even asexual conversations for allosexual people, or aromantic conversations for people who are alloromantic. Is that the term? I'm actually not super up to date with the terminology at the moment, but I always learning more. What is the meeting together of Biplus and ace aro spectrum? I often see on Biplus message boards or forums people saying, "Ooh, I'm not sure if I'm bisexual because I know I like sex with women, and that's really great. I have a lot of fun with it. But with men, I'm not really sure if I'm attracted to them sexually, but I do have these big, crush romantic feels, and I've become like totally obsessed with my best friend or my work colleague, and I'm not sure what to do with it, and it's really confusing, but it's not necessarily sexual. Perhaps that's okay, right? It's okay to be Biplus and have a kind of broadly differential experience of your sexual and romantic attraction to people of different genders. And I'm saying like in broad sweeps because sometimes the clear line between man and woman is not necessarily that clear. But in broad sweeps, people do kind of use these categories, and they have meaning in society. I want to sort of share with any BIPLUS people that if you have maybe like a purely sexual attraction to men, but do not want to date them, do not want them to be your partner, then and also have an attraction to women as well, or to non-binary folks, then like that's fine. You're still allowed to be bi. You're welcome if you want to use bi or pan or whatever it might be. That's okay to have varying sexual or romantic attraction to different genders. And in fact, I would say is like probably the norm.
Yeah, so it speaks to that idea of evidence and proving our identities in different ways, doesn't it? As though it still speaks to that idea that bisexuality is 50% gay and 50% straight, which it's just not. And it's a whole identity as it with all of its nuances, and really important that if you want to identify as bi, like you get to, irrelevant of if you never want to do anything about it in any direction. And yeah, I think it's very, very valid. And I know lots of people who have very specific kinds of attractions are still multi-gender attracted in different directions, but really are only interested in pursuing things in just a couple of those directions. And again, I think that's talking about romantic attraction and sexual attraction really helps to express this and stop people feeling like they're like, oh, I think I'm bi, but am I really bi? Or do I get to be that because I've never had sex with someone who's got this body? And yeah, I think it takes away a lot of that pressure and that expectation that you should know and you should have tried everything before you can say, yes, I definitely like this flavour. Bisexuality is my flavour because I've done everything. I'm like, great if you have the time and the energy and that's something that you want to do, but there should be never any expectation on anybody to have to do anything to understand themselves. And yes, that can be a part of understanding yourself is those explorations. But again, that idea that maybe you push yourself to have sex with someone because you felt like maybe you should, and that there's again like that. I hope people really don't feel that way, and I know that they do. But there's a lot of sadness in that, isn't there? Feeling like you must do something that potentially you're really not wanting to do because you think if I were really bisexual, I could or I should. No, I very much scrap all of that. And the same way that it's also okay to be attracted to specific kinds of genitals and not others. I think again sometimes we shame that. Like you should if you're like these people, you should be attracted to every version of them, and no, we're not always. And I think that that's also okay. Like that we all experience our sexuality in different ways, we all practice it in different ways, and that is okay. I think being respectful and considerate of the people you do that with is what matters. It's not like more broadly than that. It's a very personal thing, and it's great to be able to talk about it publicly if that's something you want to do. And I think having these conversations is really important. But for a lot of folks, still, sexuality is a very personal, private thing, and how you express that and how you explore that is yours.
I think so. Something that's kind of beautiful about BIPLUS attraction, forget about behavior or genitals necessarily, is thinking about really like other elements of a partner that, whether they're a sexual or a romantic partner, that might actually be way more important than their gender. So maybe like dating people who are really funny is super important to you, or dating someone who is the same like ethnic background or speaks the same language as you, or who lives really close to you. Maybe those things are way more important than a person's gender, because of course like gender only makes up one part of someone's experience. including sometimes people who really just feel like they don't have a gender, like who are agender.
Yeah, so you make a very good point about the nuance of all those things. And again, it's that coming into play with the things you've been socialized to want and to like and what you've been told is beautiful. I think there's a lot of work to be done in that, and that there's not a clear line between the personal and the political when it comes to attraction and bodies. And like you say, that really speaks to the race and background and so many cultural aspects of how we're taught to view attraction and what we're told is beautiful and acceptable in all these different ways as well. And I think that only with a lot of kind of reflection and delving can you really truly connect with the things that you actually want, because we're very much funneled in particular directions, aren't we? And I think it's that understanding the complexities of that and allowing ourselves to also feel some of the things that we do again, and not shaming ourselves if you're not a bi person who's into potentially anybody, just the same as if you're a bi person who's also into quite specific things. That yes, please reflect on that and definitely check in about if it's rooted in racism or if it's rooted in sexism or bioessentialism, definitely. And also to allow yourself that room to feel the things you do and to not think that you should feel something different. Because I think we can get into that as well with being bi, is that I had all these particular rules as a cishet person, and now as a genderqueer bi person, do I just have all these different rules that I now have to ascribe to them in a different way? And for me, a lot of what should be beautiful for me, I think, about being queer in these ways is allowing myself to be myself in different ways. Yes, checking in with all the ways that that's been impacted and influenced, but also, allowing kind of my authentic nature to also be seen and okay as well.
For my own experience, say growing up assigned male at birth, I had to really unlearn deep-seated homophobia that was ingrained in me through all of the many different places in the world that it occurs, in order to allow myself to explore attraction to men. And there's a lot of shame and silence packed into that, a lot of internal sort of inhibition of I'm not allowed to like this, and so I won't develop my kind of attraction. I won't explore how those things really kind of appeal to me, because it just felt really off the table, not allowed. That's bad. And I think now you kind of mentioned, well, being genderqueer, being bi. Are you just swapping one set of rules for another? Now am I only allowed to like people with septum piercings? No, obviously not. And it's okay for me to still be attracted to the hegemonic norm. I can still be attracted to a Hollywood star who looks like the idol of the box of gender or of the hetero norm.
It's so hard, isn't it? I have this part of me as well, sorry to interrupt you, but this bit that's do I just not want this because I've been told that I should? And it's taken me a while, I think, to get to a point more in my life where I'm actually some of the things I was told I should want, I do want those things. But I want them because I genuinely want them, not because I was told to. And there's this part of me that's I have to actually be conscious to allow myself to want the normal things or the okay things or the things I've been programmed for, because sometimes I do. And I don't want to not do things that will feel good or not do the things that I enjoy or will bring me a lot of joy because I thought I was supposed to. And I think that we can get into a little bit with that in queer community, this idea that, well, I'm just different from that, so I don't want to do those things. And that's great if you don't, but don't restrict yourself from the things that might bring you joy and happiness because you think you shouldn't. Because it's just like we say, a different set of rules, and for me it's kind of tearing those things away. It's not just having a new set to learn.
I don't know if you've come across the compulsory heterosexuality kind of discourse online. I know Adrienne Reach was kind of involved with it, but especially amongst lesbian communities, I tend to find it. What this compulsory heterosexuality kind of describes is saying, not only is heterosexuality the norm and assumed, but also kind of enforced, particularly on women, that like you must have attraction to men and only men, and have relationships with men and only men, and have sex with men and only men. And it kind of talks about it almost like a brainwashing of women to respond in particular ways and to deny same gender attraction. And look, I think some of it is useful as a tool to pick up, to start questioning, where does my attraction come from? And what are the parts of me that are unexplored because of the norms in society? I've also seen a ton of biphobia in those sorts of discourse and those sorts of articles as well, of saying, well, if you're a woman and you experience attraction to women and you experience some attraction to men, well, your attraction to men is bullshit and is just because you got brainwashed by society, and your attraction to women is really real and you're actually a lesbian. And I'm like, oh no, what about all the bis?
It can make you really feel so kind of uncomfortable in yourself and really icky, like, oh, is this, I've had periods of time where I was like, oh shit, maybe I am gay because I really like people who are more similar gender to me. And then I've had to reflect, I'm like, oh, I've also really, really, really liked people who are different genders to me. And it's almost the minute I just accepted more fully my similar gender attraction that it discredited like all the parts of me that had felt really contented and happy and loved and supported and attracted to men. And yeah, it's very confusing. And I think, like you said, there's a line to be drawn between looking into things and also then never stopping interrogating yourself and being like, oh gosh, am I really wrong about everything that I experienced before because I've read this article and now it tells me that I've made to feel these things, and are they true? And it's mind-boggling, isn't it? You can go down many rabbit holes, I think, and become quite stuck if there's not also a bit of the other things. It's okay to be on a journey. It's okay to change your mind. It's also okay to be bisexual and have attractions to lots of different kinds of people. And I think there's a danger in those things, and also there's a freedom and a danger with everything, I suppose. And it's this idea of balance, isn't it? This incredibly challenging thing that we're always trying to do, walk the tightrope between challenging things and also accepting parts of ourselves. And it probably never really ends, does it? But I think it's a very important point to make about those things. And I've definitely experienced layers and layers of those aspects of feeling that they're just parts of you just weren't supposed to exist. And parts of you are far more celebrated and accepted, and I felt that hugely with my gender for years and years. Like, I performed femininity in the ways I was told to for a really, really, really long time, because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. So again, like, it's an enforced cisgenderism that I spent many years perfecting before realising it wasn't at all what I wanted to do. But I still feel it now. I still feel those pressures, and I still feel the disappointment from other people that I'm not performing it in the way that I should be. And it doesn't really go away. So I think as well that if you're really brainwashed, you don't get rid of it. You learn to be able to see it, and you learn to say, actually, this is what I'm feeling now. Is that thing I was told to do, not the thing that I want to do.
Thinking about my, with my psychologist hat on, healthy human functioning is this strange kind of balance between being able to doubt yourself enough to question things that need to be questioned, to challenge the norm, to maybe like approach conflict, and also trusting yourself enough and kind of backing yourself enough, believing in yourself enough to still be able to actually just function in the world and make decisions and take actions. So the two polar extremes of like question everything all the time as a good way to like just get analysis paralysis and be anxious your entire life, but also question nothing, just do, just like you trust your gut all the time, you always know what's best. That's also like not great. And if we bring these things into bisexuality, we're often sort of feeling torn between the outside world that often says, question yourself, bisexuality doesn't exist, it's made up, it's this, it's that, it's these shifting definitions. And it's hard to kind of find some stability while also still doing that useful questioning and useful growth. I think that's a tough tightrope to walk. Something that was really powerful to me early on in my coming out experience was meeting some bi people who were not questioning their label at all, who are just saying, I'm bi. I've been bi for 20 years. It hasn't really changed that much. That label still fits for me just fine. And seeing that level of stability and confidence gave me something to look up to, something to kind of model, like, oh, like that's possible, because we don't think about them as models, but generally we see straight people who have believed that they're straight and are comfortable with the word straight or heterosexual all of their lives. And with a lot of kind of like gay and lesbian narratives, often we kind of see them in movies or hear them from friends or in community as like, oh, I knew really, really young that I had attraction to this gender and not at all to this gender. I was not like other boys, all of these things. And so even though they might have taken some time to share their sexuality, it was stable and consistent and felt like maybe what they wanted was not really questioned. Maybe kind of the expression of it was. But for bi people, and I think like listening to this ACE panel a while ago, for many ACE and Arab people or people with kind of shifting levels of sexual or romantic attraction, can be much trickier working out the truth or working out what's going to feel stable, or the maybe relative benefits of having more fluidity versus stability.
I think we're kind of taught sometimes to praise the stable and to think that anything that's not that is somehow less favourable. And I think, again, it's a lot of society, how I've been taught, is that it's good to have made a choice and you stick with your choice, and that's a very respectable, good thing to do. And I think for those of us who that doesn't work for, there is sometimes a feeling of kind of almost like you failed at doing the right thing. And I actually feel the opposite over time, that for me there's so much more joy and freedom in those spaces that aren't those restrictive kind of stable things. But I definitely haven't, I've had to learn to celebrate that. It's not something that I was taught to celebrate. Yeah, I think that's the same with kind of being, I don't know, emotional in different ways, that it's almost, but you're more praised if you can be very stable and consistent. And like for me, I'm very emotional. I feel things very strongly. I can swing quite wildly between things. And again, that was something that I've almost felt a lot of shame about, in the same way that I have with bisexuality, because it's not stable. And I feel like very few of us are stable most of the time. I think it's something we should hold up as being good or right or the best thing. It's just there's ways of exploring the world, of being in the world. And I think for me, they all kind of, those aspects feed one another, and yeah, unstable isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be a beautiful, the chaos can be a wonderful place to be as well. It's very colourful.
A healthy amount of chaos, a healthy amount of bisexual chaos in your life. Bring it in, get some of that novelty. Well, perhaps on that note, we might kind of wrap up today's conversation. But once again, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, Megan. Thanks so much for watching. Get in touch with Melbourne Bisexual Network if you like. Join our Biplus community of Melbourne on Facebook. Get in touch, say hello. Love to hear from you. Bye for now.